Welcome to ATD's Talent Development Leader podcast, featuring monthly conversations with the greatest influencers in the talent development field. We cover the latest trends, hot topics, and future focused ideas that current and aspiring TD leaders need to know. Learn more by visiting www.td.org and searching for Talent Development Leader podcast. Today, I'm joined by Angela Cheng-Cimini, who most recently served as the Senior Vice President of Talent and Chief Human Resources Officer for Harvard Business Publishing. In this role, Angela led the Human Resources and Facilities and Administration units, spearheaded efforts to develop a talent roadmap that supports the business strategy, and created a deeply engaged and diverse workforce. She is now the fractional head of HR for the Chronicle of Philanthropy, the preeminent source for nonprofit professionals committed to the advancement of the common good. Angela brings 30 years of both generalist and specialist human resources experience, having worked across consumer product goods, professional services, and high-tech as well as nonprofits. Angela's previous roles included the VP of HR at ClearMotion Inc. and the Global Head of Human Resources for Crabtree and Evelyn. In addition to sitting on the Alumni Board of Directors for Cornell University, she is a member of CNBC's Workforce Executive Council, a body of CHROs dedicated to advancing the practice of HR, serves as an HR venture advisor for Semper Virens, an early-stage venture fund that invests in technology transforming healthcare, work, and financial wellness. And Angela serves as an advocate for the AAPI community for nonprofits. Hi, Angela. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be back and talking with you.
Well, today we're talking about organizational courage. This is an important topic for our listeners as we think about the state of leadership in organizations today and a renewed focus on ethics, emotional intelligence, and transparency. According to DDI's leadership trends for 2025, human connection is the catalyst for future success. The leaders who will thrive in 2025 and beyond are those who can inspire resilient, innovative teams by fostering trust and genuine connections. The 4 trends this report notes are, number 1, the AI and innovation paradox, balancing technology and human touch. Number 2, beyond physical workspaces, fostering connection and trust in a hybrid world. Number 3, the power of future-focused mindsets, developing versatile talent. And number 4, the leadership pipeline crisis, addressing burnout and the undesirable leadership role. Now, Angela, all of these trends have been ones top of mind for our listeners, talent development leaders, and I've been hearing them bubble up in conversations with them. So I'm really excited to talk to you today and kind of dig into some of these trends and really frame the conversation around the idea of organizational courage. So can you kick us off by talking about why organizational courage is so important in today's world of work? And first of all, what is organizational courage? A little definition would be helpful.
So organizational courage is a corollary to psychological safety. So, you can provide an environment that is psychologically safe, and also employees need to know how to take advantage of that. So even if your manager says, I'm open to feedback, I want to be challenged, some people still struggle with that. And just because they're conflict averse or they don't like to confront risk. So organizational courage is the power for people to stand up and speak their mind and challenge and add value to a conversation when it's sorely needed. I don't think we have to tell your listeners much about what's going on in the American political landscape, but even geopolitically, right? We are very divided, and there are people who feel strongly one way and yet are afraid to stand up and share what they're feeling. And what's funny is that courage builds on itself. So when one person steps up, you help others to do the same. So I think right now, when the world is in so much turmoil, we need more people who are courageous, as well as people who are building psychological safety. And I just recently read a headline, I don't remember where it was, but it was about Gen Z and how they are really looking for a new model of leadership. They're not quite quitting. What they're being is more vocal about the kind of leaders that they want. They want leaders who will encourage them to speak up. They want leaders who will lead with compassion and vulnerability and authenticity. That's very different from what that looked like 10 years ago and certainly 30 years ago when I entered the workforce. So I think organizational courage is something we really need to start talking a lot more about.
Curious if this, and we might get into it a little bit more later, but if this is something that, can bubble up within an organization at any level, or if really the impact or the onus is on leaders to set the tone or the example when it comes to courage.
I think, like psychological safety, it's easiest when it's top down
Hmm.
because the leadership team, the executive team sets the tone for how the culture should feel. But there are occasionally, sometimes rarely, those individuals who will step up and speak because it is more important. They feel it is bigger than just them and they're willing to take the risk. So I would say, Anne, that it could come from anywhere, but gosh, so much easier if it starts at the top.
What does this look like? You talked about stepping up, speaking up, having the courage to say things that might not be the popular opinion, probably holding to a line or a value that you believe in. But what are some other examples of kind of how organizational courage shows up, what it looks like in organizations, and some behaviors of organizations that exhibit it?
I think in human resources, what has been my superpower is my willingness to speak truth to power. And that's something that I've really worked hard on because I think it's where I bring the most value. When I've had the most productive and robust and enjoyable relationships with my CEOs, when that has been reciprocal, right? When they're willing to say, hey, Angela, I saw this, maybe you want to try this differently. And I can do the same. I can hold up a mirror to the CEO and say, hey, this is the energy you're projecting out to the organization. Is that what you wanted? If it is, that's great. If it's not, let's talk about how we tweak that. And so I think that's one version of what it looks like, right? Is just the willingness to stand up and call, a duck when it walks and talks like a duck. At an organizational scale, what that looks like is leaders continuing to practice and ask for people to step forward. So, one of the most compelling examples I recently saw in action was I met the CHRO of Kyndryl, which is an 80,000 person spinoff of IBM. I think they've been in existence about 2 or 3 years. And I had the pleasure of listening to the CEO talk, and he walks around with their book of values in his jacket pocket. All day long, he would tell you that culture and values make the difference. And they are doing so incredibly well. And they have scaled culture for 80,000 people. And one of the things they practice is transparency and the willingness for people to have really hard conversations with one another and call each other out when people are going astray of their values. So that's an example of where it's really being done well.
You mentioned organizational culture being adjacent to psychological safety. I know that's a topic that's been super trending and held dearly by our listeners in the past several years. How is it different? How are psychological safety and organizational courage different and maybe similar?
So I'm trying to think of a metaphor. Let's see if this works, Anne. So if you're going to ride a horse for the first time, the horse is going to be gentle, right? I don't ride horses, but my understanding that horses have a sense. The rider is fearful, that throws off their cadence. But also, older horses that have done a lot of training know that, okay, this is a kid. This is the first time I'm going to go gentle. I'm not going to go off, and race off, but I'm going to take a gentle trot, right? So that's sort of psychological safety. I'm creating an environment where you feel safe to get on the horse, where you feel safe to try something new. At the same
Mm.
time, it takes courage to get on the horse. Even though the horse isn't creating an environment where there's any reason to be fearful, you also need to screw up, your courage to say, I'm
Yeah.
going to get on. And if you fall off, to do it again. So I think that's sort of, the different side of the same coin.
Psychological safety is kind of the entry point or the foundation upon which then you can kind of build the behaviors of courage and so on. Okay.
Although courage can
Good.
come first, right? And in some cases, that's a lot
Mhm.
scarier, right? If you're exercising your courage in an environment that's not psychologically safe.
Mhm.
I have certainly done that. And it can go, sort of one of three ways. One, you can change things because people are like, oh my gosh, that's actually, you just broke the dam open. Let's talk about that. It can make things worse, or it will have no effect at all. So being able to read the room and understanding and anticipating what might be the response is certainly helpful when you're stepping into the role of being a courageous speaker.
I can imagine there's a lot of hunger for this topic, this conversation now, especially as you think about so much change in organizations and facing some uncertain futures and kind of knowing when's the time to speak up and have something to say and when's the time to see where this goes, right? Just ride it out a little bit more. But as far as organizational courage relates to leadership, I'd like to dig into that a little bit more, and especially talent development leadership. Why is this an important skill for leaders to develop, for our listeners to develop? And how can they do that? What are some practical ways that they can do that?
So when we talk about bringing your full self to work, right, that's about not having any hurdles or obstacles or barriers to speaking your mind, to bringing all of your gifts and your talents to bear. And if you ever have to self censor or edit or curate what you say, right, then the organization is losing out on some bit or some piece of you that could be super valuable. From a talent development perspective, we want to be able to give people the skills to recognize when there's an opportunity to say something, to help leaders create an environment where people can do that. And then perhaps even to give people the skills to have those conversations when neither is present, but is still being built. So, how do you build psychological safety? How do you develop organizational courage? I think those are real skills that can be taught. It's
Mm.
certainly not something I had in my first job, right? I mean, when you're 22 or 21 years old, you're naive, you're green as hell. It's a very rare individual, I think, that knows that they can just charge into a room and start speaking truths to other people who've been at it for much longer. I've certainly made my mistakes where I've stuck my foot in my mouth, right? And so people like take me aside and be like, Angela, let's play that back a little bit. How might you reword that in a way that lands better so your message doesn't get lost behind the emotion or the brusqueness or the delivery? And so all of those things can be taught and need to be practiced.
And I think for listeners too, making it a priority to have these conversations with your team members, with the folks you're developing, is really powerful for their own development and their engagement, right, in the work of the organization. So it's a good point, seeing how we've progressed and changed in talent development and in HR over the years and what we can bring to the table for employees, what they're going to learn from us and then take from the organization and grow from there.
I think sometimes we over engineer and overthink the way in which we can teach that skill. So we could even start with something small. I have an employee, let's say, who has a personal hygiene issue, and it's a really awkward conversation to have. It's very personal. So just role play on that. So find the courage to say, to pull someone aside and say, you know what? I've noticed recently, right, that when you come into work, you're maybe not showing up as your best self. You're maybe a little disheveled. And we have noticed, right, that there are some personal hygiene issues. Let's talk a little bit about, is everything okay at home? Are you well? How can I support you with that? Because it's starting to affect your teammates. Right. So start with something small like that, something that makes you super uncomfortable. It's kind of
Mhm.
cringy conversation. But more likely than not, the recipient of that is going to be mortified that their colleagues were talking about them in that way and so grateful that someone actually had the courage to tell them. And so from there, you can graduate to much harder, larger strategic issues like the business strategy is not something I agree with. I think we need to really take a deeper look at the possibility of success here. And here are some alternatives. That's a hard conversation to have with your executive team, but that's the kind of conversation that you eventually have to graduate to.
It's a great practical example. You've been doing quite a bit of research and writing in this space lately. You mentioned an anecdote earlier about what this looks like or could look like in an organization. Any other examples of models from which leaders could learn about organizational courage?
I'm hoping to write a piece about organizational courage, and my initial research didn't find a lot more of it was about psychological safety. So I think this is a green field that's ready
Yeah.
to be explored. So I'm really excited about that. I'll tell you, Anne, I've started a new job 2 months ago, and I'm still learning how to work with my manager. She and I had an exchange that in retrospect didn't go all that well. And I wish that I had showed up different. So at the end of the day, I called her, said, "Hey, do you have 5 minutes?" And she said, "Of course." And I told her sort of, I apologized for how the conversation went down, that I took accountability for the way I showed up. I shared a little bit about where I was at that moment, what my headspace was, not as an excuse, but so that she could have some context as she's learning more about me. And she sort of reciprocated in kind. And it was just a really lovely conversation that had I just said, you know what, I'm just gonna move on from that. I think that would have been a burr that over time could have become more and more irritating, more and more annoying. But instead, she and I both leaned into the conversation and took advantage of the moment to say, for both of us, that could have been better. And these are the ways in which we want to work together. And it was great. Like I felt like a load had been lifted, and I'm sure it was the same for her. I just had the right amount of ego to know
Mhm.
to pick up the phone and say, that mea culpa, that was on me. And also to say, how can I do better? Tell me how we can make this work. And it turned out to just to be a really, really wonderful, authentic, sincere conversation.
Gosh, and how powerful for leaders to model that, the transparency there, the ethics in that, the integrity, if this really grabbed hold of folks and then again, from the top down, right? I think that's where you have the most impact. That's
Yeah.
As we wrap up today, and I know you've been doing a lot more than just organizational courage, working as a fractional head of HR now and kind of in this new season of your career, would love to hear about what in your recent research, reading, or work has surprised you lately. This can be, again, within or beyond organizational courage or even leadership, something that's caused you to pause and think, huh, or aha. Curious what these insights might be.
What has caught me by surprise? I think what continues to catch me by surprise is how hard we make leadership seem to be. So I was recently having a conversation with someone, and I said, I know that I am not I don't have superpowers, right? But there are sometimes when I feel like what I believe to be right, to be true, to be so obvious. And it seems not so obvious to other people in the room that I feel like I have x-ray vision. That is the singular answer. That is the only way we can do this. And I've been fortunate that my instinct serves me really well. And more often than not, what my gut told me turned out to be the right path. And sometimes the team has chosen to follow that path, and other times it hasn't. And I'm never happy when we choose the wrong path, when I know that there was a better answer. There's always regret. And I wish that we would just lean more into our intuition, that we would be willing to break the cycles of bad habits. Because there are plenty of people, if you let them, who will tell you how you're showing up, who will be honest with you, who will hold up a mirror, who will have the courage to say, yeah, you know what, that one, not so good. And I wish we would ask that question of others more often. How did that do? And it's not an ego stroking. It's how did I do? How did that go? What can I do differently? What can I learn? What can we learn from this? And all of that takes courage, right? To assume that you didn't get it perfect every single time, that there was nothing to learn from that event. And I think that's not that complicated. And it surprises me that we continue to make it that.
It is interesting. I've been in this field for 17 years now, working at ATD in particular. Since day one, leadership development has always been a top challenge, a top trend, a top
Yes.
point of angst. And so it is interesting where you say, why is this so hard for everyone? But that resonates with me for sure. Well, I appreciate all of your experience, your insight, your research, your work in this space, and all that you continue to do for the field as you lead. And thank you for spending time with us today. How might listeners connect with you if they want to learn more, if they have any of their own questions to ask?
Yeah, thank you. I'm the only Angela Cheng-Cimini on LinkedIn. So if folks will just let me know that they heard me with you doing a quick riff, I'd be happy to accept any invitation to connect.
Well, thank you so much, Angela.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you for listening to this podcast by the Association for Talent Development. If you found this show insightful or useful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with a colleague.